It all started in the Magic Theatre in the mind of J. Henry Moore, a small, bespectacled, gnome-like character in his early 30s, sporting a shaggy beard and long hair, where Jack, as he was called, visualised the theatre. His great friend Jim Haynes would find a space for it. It was part of the Jim and Jack show. In physical appearance and personality, they could hardly have been more different. Jim was a tall, genial bear of a man with trim-cut beard and neat dark hair, who warmly hugged you. Jack was secretive and evasive, avoiding the limelight that shone so brightly on Jim. They were part of the American expat crowd that made the counterculture sparkle in the London of the late 60s. I first met up with them in the autumn of 1966, when they were part of the collective who brought out the early issues of IT International Times, the voice of the seminal underground movement. We teamed up on my theatre of action idea, the Fletcher File, based on a transcript of a murder trial. Jim hired that vast, cold and empty former railway shed in Camden called the Roundhouse. This was the early days, and it had only been used for 2 parties before I edited and adapted the script, not for the stage, and the presentational supervision, not direction, was by J. Henry Moore. This event took place on Sunday, the 5th of February 1967. We called for the release of Roy and Alice Fletcher and the arrest of the Home Secretary. By the end of that year, they were let out after serving 6 years of a life sentence, and the case became an underground cause célèbre. At that time, I used to visit them in their flat they shared in Long Acre in Covent Garden. Jim had come down to London from Edinburgh, flushed with success and adoration, having found the Travis Fringe Theatre Club. He had brought Jack down with him, and they'd found an empty warehouse in Drury Lane and converted it into an experimental multimedia centre called the Arts Laboratory, containing a theatre, a cinema, art gallery, restaurant and open space. The chemistry was right. The scene was set, and Jim and Jack's dream warehouse became the centre where many avant-garde works took place. Jim was a catalyst that brought creative types together, an underground entrepreneur who could make things happen with shoestring budgets and the love and sweat of an army of devoted helpers. I was one of them. In its short heyday, it catered to the celebrity crowd and was a place to spend an evening with the counterculture. In the autumn of 1967, I sojourned abroad. I travelled to South Africa to see my dying mother, then on to Kenya and Israel. I used the time to finish writing Love Play, an LSD-induced lyrical fantasy for the theatre. My characters had no life careers, only life rhythms. There was no exposition, only explosion, and no narrative, only patterns. I was inspired by the mad visionary and surrealist Antonin Artaud, who wrote of the theatre as the truthful precipitate of dreams. I came back to London in the late summer of 1968. It was a strange time altogether. The spirit of the time was rampant with mayhem and discord. Chairman Mao's little red book jostled with the embryonic reality of a cybernetic age. Angry anarchists vied with whacked-out weirdos. Reality freaks versus space cadets. Pass the liberation and blow your mind We were on a freewheeling roller coaster, veering from sexual liberation to spiritual upsurges, helter-skelter from drugs and rock and roll to macrobiotics and yoga. It was the moment to smash the clocks and arrest time. Revolutionary fervour was running amok. Radical situationists were storming the barricades in Paris. Students and the dropout homeless were squatting empty properties in London. There were violent demonstrations against the war in Vietnam. And in the USA and in Europe and in the USA, Black Power erupted into race riots. At the end of August, the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia laid waste to the dream of the Prague Spring. Wearing a flower in your hair and saying, "Far out, man," as sure as hell didn't endear you to heavy political heads. Nevertheless, it was so good to be back at the Arts Lab after all those months away and to see my good friend Jim Haynes. The lab had drifted towards being a people theatre where we were all performing artists just by virtue of being there. The nice thing about the place was that all sorts of interesting people would pop in. Through Jim's largesse, I worked as a makeup artist for Frank Zappa. Went down to Stonehenge on a red double-decker bus with the Fugs and sat on the floor, cross-legged, rapping with Mama Cass, she of the mamas and papas. That September, just a stone's throw from the Arts Lab, the hippie musical Hair opened and let the sun shine in with numbers like Sodomy and Hashish. We would rush through the auditorium as the show ended and dance on the stage with the actors and audience. The Lord Chamberlain's powers of theatre censorship had just been abolished after hundreds of years. Later that month, I went to Amsterdam in search of a roving street theatre group called the Human Family, which was the creation of the mother of the family, my old friend Jack. They had just toured the hip capitals of Europe during the summer, creating their spontaneous happenings and festivals. I met up with them at the Fantasia in Prince Hedikana Street, now the Cosmos. It was like setting foot on some strange film set, watching a surreal movie be made of this new utopia where long-haired tourists lounge on carpeted platforms, sipping blue tea and smoking dope. It was the first of its kind, and Amsterdam was the magnetic centre of the new Stone Age. That night, I joined them in the wood-beamed attic above some artist studios, this troupe of ragged, wild-eyed poets and gentle, blissful dreamers in their faded hippie finery. We squatted in a circle eating quietly our beggar's banquet of rice, fried beans, onions and carrots. We were a motley crew, some 20 of us from many countries, sleeping in our loused up bags and blankets.